Well, thank you for being here, Andrew.
Thanks for having me.
And my first question is just tell us a little bit about Isaiah and the work that you do.
Sure. Isaiah. So we we talk about Isaiah as being a vehicle that people get to drive. And it is a vehicle of everyday people of faith and people of goodwill, to put our values into action in what we call the public arena, to shape laws, to shape budgets, to shape the structure of our society, our economy, our social life together, to get involved in the politics, the decisions that govern our lives, and to actually have a say about those. And we want more and more of us to have a say about those. And so our work in Isaiah is to invite folks to step in to the public arena to make the changes that they want to see. And we have a broad coalition within the vehicle of Isaiah. So it started as, I think, like Catholics and Lutherans got together and said we should like come together and do this work together, because we can impact, we can have a greater impact by doing this together. And this was over 20 years ago. But since then, we have grown a lot. So we now include the Muslim coalition of Isaiah, who experienced what Isaiah was doing and said, we want to be a part of that because we want to have our voices heard. We have the Young Adult Coalition that works on mostly college campuses with young people. And Kids Count on Us, which works with childcare centers specifically, so childcare providers and teachers and parents of children can shape the childcare system and the budgets and the laws around that. We work all across the state. We've got focused work in the Twin Cities. I'm a suburban organizer, so I work in the suburbs, but also in Rochester and St. Cloud, and we're expanding to other places like Albert Lea and Grand Marais. So bringing people together on a shared agenda, so a shared set of values and vision for Minnesota that is largely we talk about in three overarching terms. So multiracial democracy, in which everybody gets to belong and gets to have a say here, whether we're indigenous or fifth-generation Minnesotan or newcomers, immigrants get to have a say, where people have the right to vote is protected, and more and more people get to have a say. And then caring economy is another kind of how we think about the work we do. So how are people's needs being met through our systems of care, health care, child care, education, housing, time to care for the people we love. And then in the last 5 years, we've developed another kind of plank of our work, which is advancing a just climate transition. And so making sure we take the steps that is within our power of our state and in our country to take action on and do what we have to do on the climate crisis. So we're not policy experts, although we have friends who are. We have one lobbyist, and we're not. So we're just everyday people who get to have a say and get to work strategically together to change these systems that are the ones that are unjust.
One of the ways that helps me to understand this process is that people who are in power, it's easy for them to make sure their interests are heard and protected. You know, they are definitely going to be whining and dining policymakers to make sure their interests are protected. And it's easy for them because they have a lot of money and power at their disposal. And a lot of times we might take for granted that our interests and our values are being represented, and yet unless people kind of gather together and really talk about it and listen to each other, that's not necessarily going to always be the case. You recently had, in May, right, the legislation session. Can you want to talk a little bit about that and some of the things that you've been working on for the last 7 years and everything that happened?
Yeah, so for us, this was a transformational legislative session, but that for those who don't track this, the state has the governor and the Senate, state Senate, and the state House, and they make laws and budgets that govern our lives. And we have been working on various issues within those kind of pillars of what I spoke about earlier, some for 8 to 10 years, some for really over a decade, that we have been pushing for our elected officials to enact in our state. And we went into this session with 8 campaigns, I believe, maybe 7 campaigns. So I can share them with you. Our kind of top priority, and we should talk more about this in a minute, but grounded in the people who make up Isaiah and what we want together is how we form these campaigns over time. And so we had a paid family and medical leave campaign that would ensure every worker gets 12 weeks of paid time off if they have a new child, adoption or birth, or need to care for a loved one, an ailing parent, or a serious medical illness. Something that most of the world has, like there are 2 countries in the world that don't guarantee at least paid maternity leave, and it's Papua New Guinea and the United States. And there were 11 states that were guaranteeing paid time off. So that was one of our campaigns. I'll move a little faster. Restoring the vote to formerly incarcerated folks who are on probation or parole. There are 55,000 Minnesotans who have not been able to vote, even though they're out of prison and back in society, back members of our community. So we want to restore the vote to them. Driver's license for immigrants after 9/11. Undocumented folks who were stripped of their right to get a driver's license was really grounded in fear. And there are tens of thousands of undocumented neighbors, family members in our state who go to our schools, work with us, and cannot legally drive, and makes their lives perpetually living in fear, and also the rest of us unsafe, with people not being able to get driver's license. That's 3. 100% clean energy, mandating utilities companies to move to 100% clean energy by 2040. Transit funding, so we had a metro area sales tax that would build out and operate a world-class transit system, which is also a necessary action on the climate crisis, and is meeting the needs of people who are transit reliant, so very much a racial and economic justice issue. We had a healthcare campaign for the Minnesota public option, so more people could buy into Minnesota Care in the future. And I'm pushing for childcare funding, so we were pushing for over $1 billion in new childcare funding. And I might be forgetting some. More around voting rights, so automatic voter registration, early pre-registration for 16 and 17-year-olds, making sure election workers, judges and such were protected and from threats of violence, and making sure that we safeguard the right to vote in Minnesota. And this legislative session, unlike previous legislative sessions, we won every single one of those campaigns. Yeah, which was, and we worked across coalitions. This was really not just the work that we did, but many organizations and many people across the state made this probably, people are saying, the most transformative legislative session in Minnesota history, and really states across the country are looking at what we did with both amazement and a desire to follow our lead on this.
Yeah, and all of this came from hours and hours and years of listening to people and what was going to make their life easier, or rather, what are things getting in their way? Sometimes we have laws that actually make it harder for people to do what they need to do. And sometimes there's just an absence of laws to protect. So it's kind of a combination. Laws can do many things. You have unjust laws and an absence of laws. And so listening to people and what's going to make it easier for you to thrive, what's going to make it easier for you to live your daily life and feel protected when something happens. And so listening to thousands and thousands of people over years is how these campaigns come together, and then actively as a large voice. I know that last spring, a few pastors, we went down to the state Capital, yeah, that's the word I'm thinking of, about a few of those issues, and either spoke to or wrote personal messages to our representatives asking them, could you please support this bill, and this is why. And it's, for me, I get to come up and say, I'm a pastor of a church, and I'm a Lutheran, and I believe strongly that God loves all people, and that all people deserve to thrive. Creation deserves to thrive, and so we need to do what we can to make sure that that happens, to either give new laws to enable or to reform and pull back laws that are getting in the way. So it is holy work to dream big about work we want to see, to gather and to organize, and there are smart legislators who put together legislation. And then it takes that work to slowly make change. Are there any other things that you want to share about the process?
Yeah, I think the heart of it is the heart of our work, and some of the questions we ask right away, we ask over and over again, actually, as we're engaging with folks, is how are you being harmed by the decisions of elected officials who are operating out of fear or scarcity, or who feel accountable to particular people, not us, right? Like people with a lot of money, frankly. How are you being harmed, and how would your life be different if we changed those? And so if we change those decisions, if those decisions changed, if elected officials were operating accountable to the public, accountable to everyday people, with a vision of abundance, in that we actually could create a state, a country, a society where everybody thrives. And so we ask that question over and over again, and that's really at the heart of what we do. I don't know how much time I have. I'd love to share kind of like what that, like
Go ahead,
some
yeah.
stories.
Sure.
So for me, and I'd like to start with my own, because we always ask this question, we want to be clear about the ways that the laws are impacting other people, sometimes more negatively, but also we're impacted by these too. And a couple years ago, there was plans to build the Line 3 oil pipeline. Anyone familiar with that? Okay, so what we understood is the amount of oil, it's like dirty tar sands oil coming from Alberta, and the amount of oil that it would run through this pipeline would be the equivalent of 50 coal-fired power plants when burned. And so it's, I am 38, and I have hopefully several decades left, and I have a 5-year-old child, and I live with, like many in my generation younger, the existential dread of the climate crisis. And for a long time, decisions have been made to not take necessary action on it for decades. And here in Minnesota, they wanted to build an oil pipeline and to move more oil so that we could burn more oil, which would hasten this crisis that's going to impact me and my child. And we brought our son, who was 3 at the time, to the place where it was being built to protest. And the governor had the power to stop it, and was choosing not to for many reasons we won't go into now, or a few reasons we won't go into now. And there was one day, this was 2 summers ago, and I remember putting my son down for a nap, and I went outside to get a breath of fresh air. And it was one of the first times where the wildfire smoke from other places hundreds of miles away had come into Minnesota and actually was like made it hard to breathe, right? Like burning our lungs. And I remember at that time feeling like this is happening to us. This is my son's future. This is my future. This is his world now. His name is Rowan. This is Rowan's world now. And I don't actually get to have a say about this, about the world that he's growing up in, and whether or not it's going to be a habitable place for him to thrive. And now, 2 years later, we've had to live a summer of air quality alerts and heat advisories. And this is just the beginning. And it's not, as someone would like you to think, just an individual problem where I should ride my bike more. I do want to get an e-bike. But we are in this place because of the decisions of elected officials and who they are accountable to. And for decades, they have been accountable to big oil companies who have lots of money, who have been pumping millions of dollars both into messaging and communicating that the crisis is not real or not so bad or there's nothing we could do about it, and into making sure elected officials don't actually take action. And so the heart of this work for me is actually saying, I am actually going to have a say about this. And we all should get to have a say about this. And I can't do this alone because I'm not a billionaire. And so I have to do it with other people to get to the point where elected officials feel more accountable to us together than to a few very wealthy people. And so we have been working very hard to build a broad coalition across race and geography and organizations and faith to take the necessary action on the climate crisis that we have power to shape in Minnesota. And we were at the center of passing 100% clean energy this year, and as well as big transit funding so that more people can have access to the other transportation options and not just burning gas. And so the work that we do is each of us finding what is at stake for us, whether it's in having paid time off to care for the people we love, having the freedom to vote, having stable housing. What is at stake for us and the people we love and for our neighbors and our community? And are we going to step in the public arena and do something about it? And we can't do that alone.
Yeah, I think one of the things we talked about was, if there's something I'm passionate about, I could write every single day to my legislator, and the legislator would be like, oh, here's Siri again. But when I'm accompanied by hundreds of other people, thousands of other people, it makes a difference. The other thing about community is that when we gather together, we actually learn from each other. So maybe some of the issues that he brought up earlier that passed you don't know much about or you don't think is important. I don't know about every single issue. But when you gather together, you hear from the people it affects. You hear their stories of why this needs to change. And it's not always something we can learn from watching the news or TV. It's not always those interests that come forward. I was thinking in my life, what my life is like now that's different from my grandmother's life. My name is on my mortgage. I can open up a bank account and a credit card under my name as a woman. I'm wearing a collar and have this life because women protested and argued and got hurt trying to change laws that never should have been there in the first place. And that is true for people of color, that's true for indigenous people. There's so many people who there's laws that shouldn't even be there, or interests that are being ignored and others that are being protected. And when we come together and listen to each other as human beings, and then advocate for how can we make life better for all of us, I really think that's part of God's holy work. It's part of what we do. And sometimes as Christians, I've said this a lot, so here it is again. Sometimes we get the message we're not supposed to be political, but coming together to speak about what's in the best interest of all people, there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, we're asked to do that as people of faith. It's very different from if we were fundraising for a particular candidate, right? That's a whole different thing. But when we are coming together as a people and advocating for the interests of our brothers and sisters and members of our community, not only is that good and okay, but it's part of our holy work as people of God. And I think we've been taught to be afraid of that and taught there's something wrong with it, instead of being encouraged to do that with a good, open heart. Well, as we wrap up this conversation, thank you so much for sharing that too. We have on the screen some listening campaigns. So this is one of the things Isaiah does, is they will hold listening campaigns in various places where people from the community can come and start sharing their ideas and what's concerning them and what they want to see changed. And that's how Isaiah starts to get its ideas of what is the next step, what's the next thing to advocate for. Do you want to say anything about these campaigns coming up?
Yeah, well, first, one of the reasons that we designed and led the Paid Family Medical Leave campaign is because we had thousands of conversations with people across the state of Minnesota many years ago, and so many stories of people experiencing pain because they did not have time to care for the people they loved. That's how we build what we go do. What we decide to go do is based on you all having a say, and so we continue to do that. And because we just won so many things, we're in a big open. We're kind of like, what do we go do next? We have some ideas, but we know that housing costs continue to be high, healthcare costs continue to be a huge crisis for folks. We know that there's more to be done on the climate crisis. There's so much more yet to be done. We know that Minnesota is still has the highest racial disparities in terms of education and economic opportunities in the country. So there's so much more work to be done. And we're going to be listening to folks across the state. These 3 events, we're inviting you to come and to one of them and participate in a listening session, but also at these 3 events, we're going to be equipping folks to come back and do it in their own congregation. And so we would love for you to come to that, but then, to take that next step of facilitating a listening conversation here. So I do have a sign up out in the hallway where you can sign up for one of those. Just give me your name, make sure I have your email in particular and which one you want to go to. And you can be a part of shaping, driving the vehicle of Isaiah, of where we go and what we go win next.
Right? So that's out on the stone table when you're leaving and you're signing up to be a reader and a counter. You can also sign up to be a part of these listening sessions. Well, thank you so much, Andrew. This is a really, really great thing for us to be thinking about, and I appreciate it very much. It's part of building peace for this world in our mission statement. So thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.